When I heard the scraping at the door, my heart froze. I knew this was no accident. I was alone in the depths of winter, tucked inside the last standing trapper's cabin for 50 miles in any direction, a rough-hewn box of pine that groaned with every swing of the wind. Outside, the storm howled like a debt long overdue. Snow knifed sideways, branches snapped, the eaves moaned under an ocean of white. Inside, I sat with boots off, wool socks steaming beside a red-eyed stove, letting its iron breath thaw the stiffness from my bones. 10 years I had kept this silence, letting it stitch itself into me until the solitude felt like skin. No footsteps, no voices, nothing but the pulse of the forest and the crackle of old memories. Nothing should have been able to reach my door in that kind of blizzard. Another scratch, deliberate now, slow and careful, like a hand trying keys it shouldn't own. Every instinct leaned toward bear, a shaggy wanderer smelling warmth, raging with February hunger, or fox, clever and fearless, or wolverine, and a wolverine in winter means fury and fur. I reached for the crowbar that served as my latch, quietly slid its cold weight free, and stood. The lamp's flame quivered, wind rattled the shutters, snow hissed through every seam. The scraping paused, as if whatever waited sensed my doubt, then started again, softer, insisting. I lifted the bar from its cradle. The door stuck to the frame with ice. I pried, braced, pulled. A blast of white fury punched my face, stealing breath. But what made me stagger wasn't the cold. It was what stared back from the threshold. 3 wolf pups, no bigger than barn cats, ribs like bent hoops under sodden pelts, clustered in the lantern glow. Snow had pasted their fur into dark ropes. One pressed its shoulder to the jamb, leaning as though the door itself might shelter him. Another trembled but didn't yield an inch of ground. The third, the smallest, lifted its muzzle toward me, eyes wide, unblinking, not pleading, not threatening, simply waiting. Wolves. At my door. I had spent a lifetime reading tracks, counting scat, mapping dens no man was meant to find. Yet in all my winters, I had never seen pups away from their pack, never seen them seek the fire of a human. Every rule that kept the wild shattered in that single breath. I knelt, no thought in my head, but the roar of blood. Steam curled from their coats. I smelled the iron tang of starvation. The pups didn't flinch. They looked at me the way lost children look at a stranger they somehow trust, confused, desperate, and heartbreakingly brave. I reached out, slow, palms up. The smallest sniffed my fingers, then pressed his icy nose into my palm, as natural as breathing. His fur was frozen stiff. I could feel his heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. Behind them the night raged, snow piling higher on my stoop as if trying to swallow the moment before it could take root. I opened the door wider. Warm air spilled over their backs. They shivered and hesitated, as though crossing that threshold meant surrendering something sacred. Finally, the boldest stepped inside, nails tapping the boards. The others followed, low to the ground, tails tucked, but eyes still fixed on me, reading my soul. I shut the door against the storm, and the cabin fell into hush so complete I heard the firewood settling in the stove. What now? Pups need meat, warmth, a mother. I had only smoked venison and a few strips of dried elk. I laid pieces on the floor. They sniffed, nudged, then ate with eerie calm. Not the frantic gulp of the starving, but measured, polite, sharing each strip. When the food was gone, they circled the stove, curling nose to tail, tiny bodies soaking up heat like stones left on a hearth. The smallest still watched me. His eyes held the same quiet the full-grown wolves wear when they regard the moon. Not animal, not human, something older. In that gaze I felt judged and, strangely, forgiven. Snow beat the roof. Sparks popped behind the stove grate. I crouched beside them, offering a scrap of blanket. They accepted, burrowed in, and the cabin filled with the faint, steady whine of pups drifting toward uneasy sleep. I should have been terrified. A mother wolf doesn't surrender her young. She fights the world to keep them. If she tracked them here, she might come crashing through the window before dawn. Yet a sobering certainty settled over me. She had sent them. No other sense fit the facts. 10 years I had waited for any knock that wasn't my own heartbeat. I thought I'd sealed myself away so completely even echoes couldn't find me. But tonight the wilderness itself had rapped on my door, 3 fragile beats on raw wood, and asked me to bear witness. I pulled a chair near, kept watch through frost-veiled glass. The blizzard's voice grew harsher, then softened, then retreated to distant muttering. The pups slept. Their small chests rose and fell in rhythm with the fire. I felt something inside me shift, an ache both old and startlingly new, as though these tiny creatures had pushed open a door I'd nailed shut a decade ago. I thought that was the end of it, just a miracle and nothing more. But nature had prepared something else entirely. When dawn never fully arrives in a blizzard, minutes blur, but I swear the next hour rewrote my map of reality. The 3 pups wake while the storm still snarls outside, stretch, shake ice dust from their coats, and trot toward me as if I'm something more than the man they met last night. One nudges my shin with a muffled whine and presses his whole side against my boot, soaking in the heat that leaks through oiled leather. Trust that naked hurts to look at. I slice fresh strips from a backstrap of venison I'd been saving for leaner months and lay them on the plank floor. Any other lupine mouths would fight for first bite, but these 3 sit. They wait until I nod. Ridiculous gesture, but I do it, and only then step forward. They take turns, bite, chew, step back, like children trained at a table they've never seen. Each morsel is savored. No snap, no snarl, just quiet gratitude in the tilt of ears and the slow wag of low tails. Outside, the storm hollers scarcity. Inside, they share like monks. When the smallest pup approaches, he tilts his head oddly, misses the meat by an inch, sniffs, corrects, eats. Only then do I notice how his eyes don't track the way the others do, pale, clouded moons, unfocused. He is blind. The larger male tucks himself against the little one, nudging him toward each strip. The third circles, vigilant, blocking drafts sneaking under the sill, guardians in miniature. Heat crawls behind my eyes, and I pretend it's just the stove. Questions hammer my skull. How did a blind pup survive this far? Why would a mother risk bringing him so close to the scent of man? Yet the answer breathes in their poise. They are here on purpose. Night deepens early at this latitude. I feed the flame and my pulse together, decide the pups stay. An old horse blanket becomes their nest beneath the window. They curl instantly, sighted ones bracketing the blind, muzzles draped over his neck the way brothers shield a brother in war stories. I watch until their breathing drops into the slow wave only the absolutely safe can manage. But safety is a lie if a mother wolf stands nearby. I slip on my coat, chamber a shell in the Winchester, habit, not intent, and push open the door. Snow has eased to whisper flakes, moonlight washing the yard blue. At the edge of the spruce line, maybe 30 paces out, the she-wolf emerges from the shadows. She is massive, coat silver where snow dusts her spine, amber where the moon reaches her ribs. She doesn't shift weight, doesn't lower ears, doesn't bare teeth. She only looks, eyes lit like embers but steady, impossibly steady. I raise both hands, palms out, gun useless at my side. My throat knots. She looked at me like a mother who was leaving behind what she treasured most and asking. No language exists for the message she poured across that distance, yet I received it whole. Keep them warm, teach them hunger can be kind, and when the sky thaws, let them choose whether to return. I felt every nail of the cabin behind me, every heartbeat of her children inside, and knew I'd been drafted into a covenant older than law. We faced each other for a handful of slow breaths. Then, as though seeing me closed a chapter, she turned. Her paws pressed perfect indents into untouched powder, carrying her into the dark between trees. She did not look back. Wind stirred, carrying a scent I recognized, faint, coppery, like old blood on cold iron. A hunter's wound? Or the slow starvation of raising pups carving her strength away? Guilt bit hard. I opened my mouth to call, but what name could bridge that gulf? The forest swallowed her silence. I stayed until my eyelashes froze together, then stepped inside. The pups hadn't moved. The blind one's nose twitched in dream. The other two slept content, as though an invisible rope still tethered them to their mother's pulse. I banked the coals, lay on my bunk, boots on, listening. Each creak of snowpack outside felt like footsteps, each gust her return. But the door stayed still, and while sleep finally dragged me under, one thought circled like a hawk refusing to land. I thought they'd be gone by morning. The storm withdrew the way a giant animal backs out of a clearing, slow, grudging, leaving bruises in the snow, but the three pups did not withdraw. Morning after morning, I opened the door expecting fresh tracks leading away. Morning after morning, they blinked up at me from their blanket, stretched, yawned, and trotted to the stove as if the place had always smelled of wolf. Days stacked like split logs. I finished my venison, thawed an elk haunch, then a jar of bear fat, each meal a liturgy of quiet gratitude. They ate side by side, blind brother guided by a gentle nudge of shoulder or muzzle, never squabbling over the largest piece. When they were full, they followed me outside, small shadows padding beside my larger one. They chased drifts, rolled, nosed at fallen spruce cones, then circled back the instant I called. And every dusk, just as the horizon bruised violet, they gathered at the window and waited for something only they could sense. That something materialized as soon as the forest finished swallowing the sun. At the far edge of the clearing, between the black ribs of the spruces, a silver figure would emerge, silent, regal, half-draped in moonlight. The she-wolf. She never approached. She never vocalized. She simply watched, head high, ears forward, tail low, in the posture of a sentinel more than a hunter. The pups would sit, backs to the glass, returning her stare through their reflections. Sometimes the blind one tilted his head, as if sight might pour through wood and glass, if he only aligned himself just so. 10 minutes, 20. Then she faded into the trees. Night after night, the ritual repeated, so precise I could have set a watch by her arrival. I tried to read meaning in her stillness. Did she doubt my motives? Did she weigh the warmth of my cabin against the wild lessons her pups would miss? Or was she simply mustering courage for an act no animal should be forced to perform, letting strangers finish the job she began? The longer she lingered outside my reach, the deeper my chest ached with a feeling I had no name for, a cross-grain of reverence and shame. She was trusting me with what a wolf treasures more than her own pulse, yet refused the shelter she had granted her young. Every night, I wanted to step into that cold and kneel, offer food, offer water, offer the ragged sack of my own regrets. Every night, caution nailed my boots to the floorboards. Then came a moon so bright, the snow gave off its own light. The pups had curled into dream knots by the stove. I could not bear to waste that glow behind glass. I slipped into my parka, crossed the yard, and stopped just shy of the tree line. She was already there, breath puffing silver, eyes large enough to drown a man's excuses. My throat tightened. "If you want me to guard them," I said, voice cracking in the glittering hush, "I will guard them, as if they were blood of my blood." The words rose in vapor and vanished. She did not blink, did not flinch. Something in the tilt of her head softened, gut instinct, nothing more. And for a heartbeat, I thought she might step forward, bridge the rift between our worlds. Instead, she turned, never looking back, and slipped into the dark like a prayer swallowed by its own silence. I waited there until my knees numbed, scanning every gap between trunks for the flicker of her return. Nothing. The forest had swallowed her clean. At last I trudged inside, slid the bar into its cradle, and sat on the floor amid the pups. They stirred, sniffing the scent of her on my coat, then settled again, trusting my heartbeat the way castaways trust a distant bell. I should have felt honored. Instead, guilt oozed through me like thaw water under rotten ice. Had my words pushed her away? Had I promised too much or too little? Morning broke brittle and windless. I brewed coffee, stepped onto the stoop, scanned the snow for new tracks. None. All day I chopped wood in a confusion of dread and anticipation, pausing every few minutes to search the tree line. Dusk arrived without ceremony. The pups arranged themselves at the window. The shadows lengthened. The spruce wall remained empty. Night fell, still empty. I paced until boards groaned. I cracked the door, whistled into the dark. No answering rustle, no glint of amber eyes catching lamplight. The pups shifted uneasily, ears swiveling, noses questing, but no scent drifted back to soothe them. Hours crawled. At last their bodies quit, and they slept, though not as deeply as before. Even in dreams their paws twitched, searching for a presence that should have been there. Guilt turned to dread, dread to a hollow ache. Wolves do not break patterns without cause. Injury, starvation, death, each possibility bloomed behind my ribs like frost flowers. I sat by the stove until the wick burned low, arguing with a god I don't believe in. By the time the last coal surrendered its glow, a stark thought settled like lead. She has abandoned them. The pups are mine now. And for a moment I almost believed that was the end of the story. 3 days passed without even a whisper of the she-wolf at the tree line, and bit by bit the pups changed. They grew restless, moving through the cabin in purposeful circuits, as if mapping every corner, memorizing escape routes I could not see. They'd pause at the window, ears pricked, then pivot to nose the floorboards beneath my bunk. Something inside them had shifted to a frequency beyond my hearing, and whatever it was, it bothered the blind pup most of all. He paced with his nose skimming every surface, bumping table legs, turning, trying again, guided only by the threads of a scent the night no longer carried. On the fourth dawn, the smallest disappeared while I split kindling at the chopping block. Panic arrowed through me. I called, whistled, searched the yard. Nothing. The other two sat by the door, oddly calm, tails thumping in a slow metronome, eyes flicking between me and the forest. 5 eternal minutes later, the blind pup emerged from the spruce shadows, jaws clenched around something dark and fluttering. He trotted straight to me, head high, and laid it on my boot like tribute, a square of fabric, frayed, stiff with years of weather and dirt, but unmistakable, a scarlet cotton kerchief, edges embroidered with crude pine trees. My heart detonated. 7 winters ago, I'd found a she-wolf caught in a wire snare meant for snowshoe hares. The cable had sawn raw rings into her chest. She bled but still snapped when I approached. Took 2 hours of soft talking and slower hands to free her. I stuffed that kerchief against the wound to stanch the worst of the bleeding before she limped off into the dusk. I never expected to see her, or that cloth, again. Yet here it was, brittle but still smelling faintly of resin, wolf musk, and my own pipe tobacco from a life I hardly recognized. I dropped to my knees, the world tilting. The blind pup nudged the kerchief closer, tail sweeping arcs of sawdust. The other two settled beside him, forming a silent guard. Their eyes shone with something beyond puppy curiosity, something that felt like intention. They brought me her memory, so I would know this wasn't an accident. The words slipped out as a cracked whisper, but hearing them spoken made my scalp prickle. Impossible as it sounded, the logic lined up like tracks in fresh snow. The wounded she-wolf I saved, the pups at my door, the nightly vigil, her final retreat after my promise. These were not random pages torn from separate tales. They were a single woven story sliding into place. Yet doubt flared hotter than hope. Maybe the pups found the cloth by chance. Maybe every wolf in these mountains carried a scarlet rag around for fashion. Maybe I was a lonely old man stringing yarn and coincidence into myth because myth was warmer than truth. I pressed the fabric to my nose. Under layers of damp and decay, I caught the unmistakable trace of yellow birch salve. My salve, same jar I'd carried that day. My chest hollowed out. Memory unspooled. Snow falling in slow feathers, the she-wolf's tremor as the cable loosened, her eyes, terrified, defiant, alive, fixing on mine before she vanished into winter's gray mouth. I felt the room shrink to fireplace glow and heartbeat thud. The pups watched, silent verdicts in fur. Their presence no longer seemed random. It felt deliberate, orchestrated across seasons by a wild intelligence we pretend animals lack. Reverence buckled into unease. If these were her pups, why leave them? Had she known she was dying? Had the trap taken more from her than I saw? Was tonight the night I would find her body glazed in moonlit frost? I stood, kerchief clenched like a lifeline, and paced a circle so tight my boots squeaked. Doubt squared off against wonder, each swing landing harder than the last. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The pups followed me with their eyes, no judgment, only patient knowing, as though they'd already solved the riddle and were content to watch me struggle through the steps. By dusk, I'd convinced myself of the simplest explanation. Years alone had frayed my mind. Wolves deliver fabric swatches. Blind pups navigate snowstorms guided by the scent of a half-forgotten debt? Nonsense. Coincidence stacked on coincidence, nothing more. The forest is full of scraps from lost camps, and memory is a trick mirror. I folded the kerchief, tucked it into my breast pocket, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm just going mad from loneliness. That's all." And for a fleeting moment, the lie almost felt true. The cabin was too silent. No claws clicked on the planks. No warm weight pressed against my boot as I lit the dawn lamp. I called once, habit by then, but my voice bounced off the log walls and came back empty. Their blanket lay rumpled, cooling. The bowl I'd filled before bed sat untouched. A warning chill ran the length of my spine. All three pups, even the blind one who hated unfamiliar air, were gone. I yanked on my parka and stepped into a world made of blue ice and hush. Fresh powder glazed the yard, and across that perfect surface cut 3 winding trails, tiny, determined, side by side. They arrowed straight for the tree line. No adult tracks paralleled them. The pups had struck out alone, under a moonless sky, in the dead hour when owls quit hunting. Terror snapped my chest like a trap. I grabbed the Winchester, a lantern, and followed. The snow was dry and squeaked under my boots. Spruce branches clawed my hood. Shadows lunged in the lantern glow. The tracks never wavered. They threaded a narrow ravine, crossed the frozen creek where ice popped like distant gunfire, climbed a steep ridge scarred by avalanche runout. Halfway up I found blood, small rust-black beads peppering the snow. My stomach folded, but the droplets were old, iron smell fading, not fresh, not pup-sized. I pressed on. At the ridge crest the trees opened into a bowl of moon-reflected light. Wind dropped to a hush so thin I heard my pulse, and there, at the center, lay the she-wolf. Frost rhymed every lash and whisker. Snow had drifted over her ribs like a down blanket. She rested on her side, head angled toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to bruise the clouds. Her eyes, half-lidded, looked oddly peaceful, wolf gaze softened into something almost human. Around her sprawled a perfect ring of paw prints, 3 small sets, pacing, pausing, pressing close. Here, one print overlapped hers, as if a pup had nudged her cheek. There another set dug deep, claws spread in either panic or prayer. I dropped to my knees. No, 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 the word shredded in my throat. I thought I'd braced for this moment, but the sight ripped every plank of composure loose. The lantern slipped from my grip and hissed out in the snow. Pale dawn took over, bathing her silver coat in opal light. I reached to touch her and flinched at the cold fur, stiff beneath my fingertips. A sob punched free. I covered my eyes with the heel of one hand and wept hard, breath fogging in ragged bursts. They weren't just saying goodbye, I choked, rocking back on my heels. They walked her home. The truth of it struck like a physical blow. The pups hadn't run wild. They had answered a call older than language. They had escorted their mother on her last journey, 3 small guardians flanking a queen, and I, self-appointed warden of their lives, had slept while they fulfilled a duty no human could teach. When the storm of crying ebbed, I brushed snow from her shoulder, revealing the scar that wire snare left years ago, a pale ring of skin puckered tight. My kerchief had slowed the bleeding, but time had claimed its price all the same. I whispered thanks for the trust she'd shown and for the burden she'd laid in my hands. Then I looked to the tracks leading away from the ring. They pointed east, downhill, toward the cabin. The pups were already on their return march. Duty done, they were coming back to me. Grief tangled with awe until I couldn't tell one from the other. I cleared snow from her muzzle, laid my palm over her eyes, and promised I would keep them safe. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. I marked the spot in my mind, the way the pines leaned, the curve of the ridge, then followed the triple trail back through the hush. The sky warmed to rose. An owl hooted once, low and solemn, before fading into the sleep of daylight. By the time the cabin roof came into view, tears had frozen in my beard and my legs shook more from heartbreak than cold. I found the pups waiting on the stoop, coats dusted white, eyes shining with something too deep for triumph. The blind one stepped forward first, pressed his snow-damp nose to my knuckles, then led the others inside. Wordlessly, they circled the stove, curled around one another, and surrendered to exhausted sleep. I barred the door, stoked the fire, and sat beside them until frost melted from their fur. Sorrow still pulsed like an open wound, but beneath it ran a fierce, fragile purpose I hadn't felt in years. The cabin smelled of smoke, pine, and a promise sealed by moonlit footprints. I thought, in that moment, the tale had reached its final, tragic mercy, but nature was only turning the page. The days that followed rewrote the idea of home one paw print at a time. At first light, the pups padded back from their night watch on the ridge, dusted with starlight's frost, trotting into the cabin as though the doorway had always been a den mouth carved for them. They no longer huddled only by the stove. Instead, they explored in widening spirals, nose over floorboards, tail high, ears flicking at every creak of timber, sleuths claiming territory by scent and sound. The blind one led the charge, and that baffled me most. His unseeing eyes tracked nothing, yet he moved with a surety that mocked sight. He glided around chairs, ducked rafters, stepped over the hearthstone lip without hesitation, turning his head just enough to feel the room breathe. If I shifted a bucket or angled a stool, he paused, tested the new shape with whiskers, made a tiny corrective circle, then carried on as if the cabin itself had whispered the update into his fur. Watching him, I caught myself holding my breath, afraid even the scrape of lungs might jam his invisible compass. They began staging quiet coups on my routines. While I split wood in the yard, the largest pup, broad-shouldered now, gray shading his ruff, claimed the patch beside my bunk, flattening the quilt with dedicated naps. The leaner brother started ferrying treasures inside. Smooth pebbles from the creek bed, abandoned jay feathers, one perfect oak leaf lacquered by ice. He'd place each gift on the windowsill with ceremonial care, then sit back, tail sweeping the plank, eyes fixed on mine as if waiting for applause. Once he trotted in, sporting an acorn cap clenched between his teeth, and dropped it into my hand. The absurdity of a wolf offering a seed sent a laugh bursting loose, a rusty, startled bark I barely recognized as my own. Nights deepened, but loneliness did not. I spoke aloud more than I had in 10 years, narrating chores, reading weather signs, muttering names for constellations they couldn't possibly comprehend. They answered with pricked ears, head tilts, soft woofing sounds that filled the air between sentences better than any human nod. The blind pup especially, he would sit inches away, muzzle tipped toward my voice, his cloudy gaze steady, and in that unseeing stare I felt a recognition sharper than eyesight. He listened like someone who already knew the ending, but treasured every word of the path there. One dawn I woke to a hush, so complete it felt staged. Chill nipped my nose. The stove fire had fallen to embers. I swung my legs over the bunk and froze. All 3 pups lay sprawled on their backs before the hearth, paws limp, bellies exposed to the dying glow, snoring little gusts that fluttered their lips. They looked absurdly vulnerable, as if childhood had crept back under their skins and asked for one more hour of peace. My chest tightened so suddenly it hurt. I knelt, reached out, then stopped, afraid even a whisper of touch might break whatever spell had wrapped them. The room smelled of pine resin, wolf musk, and faint wood smoke. It felt like breathing inside a heartbeat. In that moment, the cabin ceased to be a refuge from the world and became part of the world they'd let me share. For the first time since I buried my own family grief out here, I was not alone. One of them stirred. The large male rolled, blinked, and met my eyes. No flinch, no apology for trespassing, only a look that said, "You belong to us now." He scooted closer and rested his chin on the toe of my boot, heat bleeding through hide and leather straight into marrow. I felt something inside me crack open, and the warmth that spilled through was half joy, half ache, the ache of a man learning his heart still worked. Breakfast became a joint operation. Meat for them, coffee thick as mud for me. The blind pup sat pressed to my calf while the others ate, waiting until I placed his share right beneath his nose. He licked my wrist once, an electric touch, quick and deliberate, before settling to chew. The cabin walls, once oppressive, seemed to lean outward, as if making room for breath long held. By afternoon they were dozing again, sunlight striping their flanks through warped glass. I stepped outside to pull fresh water from the well. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves in steady notes, each drip a promise of spring. I caught myself smiling at nothing, realizing I'd whistled the old lumber camp tune my father loved. The sound floated toward the trees, filling spaces silence had ruled for too many years. Standing there, bucket in hand, I wondered if this was simply exchange. I gave warmth, they gave company, debts settled. Perhaps I'd become no more than a stand-in mother, convenient but temporary, until instinct snapped them back to the wild. I thought I had merely replaced what they'd lost. Warm winds arrived like strangers tapping the frozen shutters, and with them came a wet cough that stole the ground from under me. One afternoon I was trimming saplings for fence posts. By nightfall I couldn't lift the axe. Fever poured through my bones, wicking strength from every joint. I dragged myself inside, bolted the door against a chill that felt born inside my own skin, and collapsed on the bunk. The room tipped, settled, tipped again. Glass rattled in the lamp. I heard my breath rasp like saw teeth in hardwood, and I understood, with a calm far too clear, that no one would stumble upon this cabin in time to help. The pups sensed the shift before the fever truly bit. They prowled the floorboards, tails stiff, ears pinned flat at the sharp scent of sweat and sickness leaking from me. The big male nudged my shoulder, whining low. I tried to stroke his ruff, but my hand shook so violently he pulled back with a startled yelp. Darkness came early, swallowing the corners of the room. Each blink stretched seconds into deep black pools. Sometime past midnight, I surfaced to find only two shapes curled at my side. The blind pup was gone. Panic sputtered inside the fever haze. What if he'd wandered and lost his way? What if a cat or a snare claimed him? I tried to sit up. The cabin swung, lights sparking in my vision. My own pulse hammered like fists on a locked door. Then the remaining pair pressed against me, one against my spine, one across my feet, leaking their furnace heat into my body. Their heartbeat drums blended with mine, slow and certain, anchoring me to the bunk long enough for consciousness to sink again. Dawn bled pale across the chinks, and with it returned the blind pup, announced by the thunk of something dropping beside the stove. I cracked an eye. He stood panting, chest heaving, a bundle of twigs clamped in his jaws. Pale green moss draped the branches like threadbare velvet. A scent lifted, a bittersweet, resin-sharp aroma I hadn't met in years. My thoughts stumbled through fever fog until memory flared. Witch's buttermoss, mountain folks' remedy for lung fever. I'd gathered it a dozen seasons back for a trapper struck with pneumonia, boiling the strands into a bitter tea that tore the sickness from his chest. How had a sightless pup found the very ridge where that moss grows, let alone carried a mouthful home through half-melted snow? He padded to the hearth, dropped the bundle, and nudged it toward me with careful taps of his nose. The meaning rang louder than words. Brew this. Live. I fumbled the kettle to the fire, hands numb, breath hitching on every cough. The other pups fetched slivers of kindling, jaws snapping dead twigs from the tinder pile, as though they'd watched me stoke that stove 1,000 times instead of 50. Soon the cabin filled with the moss's pungent steam, forest rain and iron-rich earth, overlapped by the warm musk of 3 devoted bodies plastered to my shivering frame. I swallowed cup after cup, choking on the bitterness, sweat flooding down my ribs until the blanket clung like second skin, heat stacked on heat. Somewhere in the roar of blood I slept. Dreams hammered, wolves weaving through birch trunks, a silver matriarch turning once to look back, eyes calm and sure. When I clawed awake hours later, the fever's edge had broken. My skin felt chilled, not boiling. And the pups? They hadn't moved. They bracketed me like living bed rails, coats rising and falling in steady accord with my breath. They knew, I whispered, voice raw as bark. They treated me. The wolves treated me. Tears burned behind my eyes, but they were clean, cooled by a wonder too large for sorrow. All the old lines between keeper and kept, between tamer and wild, gone, swallowed in moss-scented steam. I lay a hand on the blind pup's forehead. He leaned into the touch, tail thumping twice in slow, satisfied beats. By the third sunrise, the cough had retreated to a ghost in the corners of my chest. Strength seeped back with spring sap, one heartbeat at a time. The pups resumed their quiet patrols, though now they watched me the way nurses glance at frail patients, ready to fetch wood or water if I so much as wobbled. Each evening I brewed a gentler tea, raised the cup in the direction of the ridge, and thanked the spirit of a wolf who taught her children debts could flow both ways. I thought, with that fever broken and gratitude paid, the ledger between me and the wild must finally be balanced. Surely nothing remained to blur the boundary further. I was wrong, of course. Nature always keeps one last word folded beneath her tongue, waiting for the moment you feel certain the conversation is over. Summer spread like warm honey over the valley, and the 3 pups filled it with motion. Their legs lengthened, chests broadened, Voices cracked from squeaks into the first hints of a howl. They sprint-hunted grasshoppers, splashed the creek, wrestled in spiraling dust devils until my porch looked tattooed with paw prints. And then, without ceremony, the rhythm shifted. The broad-shouldered male was first. One dawn he trotted the tree line, nose lifted, reading air I could not taste. He looked back at me only once, head high, tail level, a soldier acknowledging his post, and slipped into the pines. I followed the echo of his footfall until it blended with wind, half expecting him to dart back in boyish mischief. He never did. Weeks later, the lean brother found his moment. He rose from a nap, shook out his coat, walked to the creek, and stared at his reflection as though consulting a map. Then he padded to the ridge and vanished down the far side, taking the porch dust and my last illusions of permanence with him. That left the blind one and me. He moved through the cabin like breath itself, tilting his head to snag every sound, every shift in scent. No longer the uncertain follower, he owned each room, trotting confident circuits, bumping nothing, mastering the world my hands had built. When I spoke, he angled his face toward mine, clouded irises shining with secrets I would never decode. One slant-lit evening, as moths battered lantern glass and the first coolness of August touched the sill, he paused beside my chair. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head and looked at me. Not the unfocused sweep of blindness. This felt aimed, precise, anchoring me in place. For a beat, the cabin held its breath, and I saw them. Deep inside that milk-white haze blazed two familiar embers, calm, gold, endlessly wise, the eyes of the she-wolf who had trusted her heart to my unsteady hands. A tremor shot through me. The cup slipped from my fingers, splashing tea across the floorboards. He didn't flinch. He simply held the gaze, letting recognition root itself until I could not deny what I saw. "She gave you part of her," I whispered, voice raw. "She is in you." The pup's ears flicked, a gesture so gentle it felt like acceptance, and he leaned, pressing his shoulder to my knee with the weight of an oath delivered. My chest tightened to bursting. Every boundary between species, between then and now, collapsed into that single touch. I had saved a life. She had saved mine in return. Now her presence stood before me, breathing through the body of a son she had taught to remember. If your heart just skipped a beat, if you feel that shimmer of understanding, subscribe. This place keeps the quiet truths no one else will speak, the proof that animals feel more than we dare believe. Night crept on, full of cricket song. The blind wolf settled near the hearth, and I slept lighter than a feather drifting on a draft, half awake to each shuffle of his paws. Sometime before dawn, a hush woke me, the sort that signals absence. The hearthstone was empty. I rose, throat thick, and eased the door open. Moonlight paved the yard in silver. No shadow moved. I called once, twice, clutching hope like a burning coal. Forest returned silence. I waited till sunrise poured gold over the ridge, waited until birds stuttered morning anthems, waited until waiting tasted like iron. Finally, I stepped across the threshold and stopped. On the stoop lay a stone, weather smooth, no larger than my fist, unmistakably shaped like a heart. I knelt, fingertips shaking. 7 years ago, the day I freed a bleeding she-wolf from a snare, I'd plucked this very stone from the creek and set it beside her tracks. A mute promise that some debts would never be forgotten. Time had buffed its edges, but the ridge along its center remained, like the spine of a book still open to the same page. I cupped the stone and my hands quivered. "They're not just animals," I breathed. "They are memory. They are wisdom. They are gratitude." Tears blurred the world until only shapes of light remained. I stood there, heart hammering, the porch filling with dawn, understanding slicing deeper than any human lesson. A mother wolf had trusted me with her children, healed me through them, and, when the last bond was secure, sent her blind heir to return the symbol of a promise completed. She had stitched our stories together with paw prints and moss, and a stone shaped by water long before either of us breathed. If I hadn't seen it, held it, I'd call it folly, fairy tale, fever dream. But I was there. I saw. I know now as surely as I know the taste of cold air in January. Nature remembers, and the beasts of this earth carry a wisdom far beyond ours. If you too believe in that hidden bond, write in the comments, "We are not alone in this world." And let the forest echo your words.